So I wanted to share some lyrics with you. It's a song that I wrote called Tarpit, and it was a machine song written in about 1989. And I had just been dumped by a girl, and I used the metaphor tar pit as like being, you know, pulled into a, a I don't know if it was like an affair kind of situation where, you know, I got really head over heels, and then I was told things, and then all of a sudden I was dumped, and it left like it's like I felt like I was sinking into into like a tar pit, and she was like this tar pit that took me in. Anyway, the lyrics go, it takes you in, no warning made, it's part of what you need. Uncontrolled, its stranglehold on your conscience it will feed. Then it goes, freedom will not be found as the tar pit pulls you down. Your last request to take a breath has led you to a certain death. And yeah, so it's kind of like the first part goes into a very little metaphor having to do with, you know, like, you know, falling in love or whatever. It's like part of what you need. And anyway, and then it goes into more of like the actual of like sinking into a tar pit. But when I first heard Heart Shaped Box, I heard Kurt use tar pit as a metaphor, and I know that Kurt really liked that song, Machine Song, Tar Pit. Does it mean that, you know, he used the same metaphor because he'd heard it before, or he just whatever? But I remember talking to Kurt about that, about because I had just gone through that relationship. Because people ask me on here, well, what did Kurt and I talk about? And it's hard to remember a lot of things, but um, regarding like that song, I know that I talked to Kurt about what it was about, and then I used as a metaphor for kind of like a feeling. It was kind of a dark breakup feeling, like my heart was pulled into a tar pit, you know. So when I heard that in Heart Shaped Box, in that context, it was weird because it made me feel like he was using it in the same context, you know. And yesterday I read all the lyrics, and it's pretty interesting lyrics. Anyway, um, uh, yeah, it's obviously hard to remember. I mean, it's 30 years ago. Conversations, it's like anybody trying to remember just hanging out with a friend and remember what you talked about, like 20, 30 years ago, even 10 years ago, you might remember a little bit. It's more like images that I have, and I remember specifically, I remember talking to Kurt about being in a band and being, we talk about our bands. See, Subvert, at the time I met Kurt, even that Nirvana moved a hell of a lot quicker than Subvert at one point. We were playing a lot of shows before, Nirvana started going, and we had actually toured down to the Bay Area, and I do remember I remember always like just letting Kurt know that um, people are gonna love the band, you know. And I was just meaning like people around locally. I as great as the band was, it wasn't like a vision of them being, like a record label would vision, hopefully a vision a band to be huge. It wasn't like that. It was just literally, when I met those guys, the band was basically unknown, And it was like a handful of people from Tacoma and from Seattle even knew who they were. I mean, I'm talking about before the 7-inch came out, But I was really excited about the band, from the beginning, you know. And I just remember, like, I don't know if I can really call it advice as much as like, I've always been this type of person that I'm to give encouragement, you know. I'm optimistic. So when I really feel something about somebody and their band or their music, I am very encouraging. And somebody that I know, there's just no doubt about it. I mean, that's how I am my whole life, you know. Um, if something catches my ear, I will tell everybody about that band and I will encourage them, you know. I don't know how many bands I have like said go on tour, go on tour. And I remember talking to Kurt about that because we had gone down. So my first tour I'd ever been on was around that same time that Kurt and I first started hanging out. And I remember, you know, at the time when I met him, we were actually doing quite a bit. We were playing a lot of shows and went on tour. We had done like a couple recordings. Yeah, so, our conversations were related to music, but I do remember encouraging Kurt as whenever possible, tour, record, I mean, just talking about how much I like the songs, I mean, or seeing them live or whatever, but also just hanging out and listening to music and watching videos. And Kurt was just really the type of person. He was really creative, so we always had something to share. It was like something to share that he's worked on. So that's where our conversations were a lot. It was like cool stuff. I mean, he was one of the people that I knew he was into unique, like, creative stuff. I mean, he was interesting. I mean, I had a lot of friends back then, but only a couple were even nearly as interesting as, or the same, or as interesting as Kurt, Um, but yeah, I mean, that's why we became friends, I don't know, he probably saw something in me, like, kind of similar, like I was like a, crazy punk rock kid that was driven to play music, driven to get creativity. I mean, like, you know, um, and that was my life, So we could relate on that level, That was like Buzz too. I mean, there's just people back then. I mean, this is the hard thing. It's like to convey to and to you guys, the listeners, that back then there wasn't that. I mean, there wasn't that many people doing music, and the people that were playing music were really fucking involved. Were really serious, really, like, most of the people were like, I mean, and then a lot of those people went on to be in bands or start record labels, or that whole community back then around here. All of these people involved in the community, like, kept doing it. People that didn't play music seriously wouldn't have even lasted a month or two back then. It just wasn't something they wanted to do. They went on to work in a warehouse or whatever. Who knows, you know? Or, well, we had to do that anyway back then to be able to partially survive. So, but you know what I mean. It wasn't their passion. But yeah, so I I do remember. I've always been that person that's encouraging and giving advice. Even that now, I think I'm trying to be careful with advice or how it's, how it's said, um, because I think it's important for somebody to be very open to creating their own path and whatever, you know. Um, but yeah, there's one video that I watched, and I think it's from February of 1994, and it's Kurt in Portugal, and he's backstage with the Buzzcocks. And if you watch that to me is a very good reminder of what Kurt was like. Where he's not getting asked a bunch of questions. That's how he was. I mean, he was like somebody that he didn't talk a whole lot, but when he'd listen a lot, and if he did talk, it would be, you know, it would be like he'd say something funny, or it would be something that was important in context, or it would spawn a conversation, or so I don't think in that, like, uh, I actually see, last time that I saw Kurt would have been December of 1993. That's kind of, I mean, that's it. All ties into this being very, the whole thing is very upsetting for me, because only a month before all the shit went down in March, I'm able to see Kurt backstage with the Buzzcocks, and he looks absolutely 100% normal to me from video viewing from a distance. That is Kurt. Totally. That's that Portugal video from 1994. I think it's like early in February or something. Um, anyway, so yeah, thank you guys for all the comments, man. There's so many comments, and I read them all, and I'm gonna have to go through them and take notes and try to respond. But there's a lot of stuff to respond to. Anyway, all right, thank you. Bye.